High above the crumbling ruins of the ancient world, the Parthenon still stands as a defiant testament to the glory of Western civilization, a marble crown resting upon the brow of the Acropolis. For millennia, we have gazed up at this architectural marvel and worshipped the deity it houses, Athena, the gray-eyed goddess, the virgin patron of strategy, wisdom, and justice. In the collective consciousness of the modern era, she is often romanticized as the ultimate feminist icon of antiquity, a powerful, independent woman commanding respect in a pantheon dominated by capricious and lustful men, a beacon of rationality piercing through the chaotic fog of war. We are taught that while Ares bathes in the mindless bloodshed of the battlefield, Athena stands apart, calculating, cool, and composed, intervening only to ensure that righteousness prevails and that order conquers chaos. However, if one dares to look past the pristine white marble and scrape away the centuries of romanticized varnish, a far more sinister portrait begins to emerge from the shadows of mythology. Beneath the veneer of the benevolent protector lies a history stained not with the blood of monsters, but with the tears of the innocent, a narrative woven not with threads of justice, but with the cold steel wire of jealousy and calculated cruelty. We must ask ourselves a terrifying question. Is Athena truly the champion of the oppressed, or is she merely the ultimate enforcer of the patriarchal status quo, a deity who secured her position of power by betraying her own gender with a ruthlessness that rivals the monsters she claims to slay? Consider the tragedy of the Gorgon Medusa, a story often sanitized for children's books, but which, in its rawest form, remains one of the most grotesque examples of victim-blaming in literary history. When a woman was violated within the sanctity of Athena's own temple, the goddess of wisdom did not turn her wrath upon the perpetrator, Poseidon, but instead unleashed her divine fury upon the victim, twisting a beautiful priestess into a nightmare of serpentine horror. Is this the verdict of a just judge, or the petty retribution of a jealous goddess who cannot abide a rival in beauty? And Medusa was not an isolated incident. From the weaving contest with the mortal Arachne to the blood-soaked plains of Troy, Athena's legacy is paved with the broken bodies of those who dared to bruise her fragile ego. In this documentary, we will not merely recount the myths, we will deconstruct the very psyche of the Olympian favorite to understand the dark psychology of a daughter who would burn the world to please her father. We are about to descend into a labyrinth of divine politics, internalized misogyny, and ancient hypocrisy to reveal the true face of the goddess of wisdom. But before we peel back the mask of divinity and expose the terrifying truth lurking beneath the helmet of Athena, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a journey into the hidden darkness of history. To truly understand the psychological architecture of the goddess of wisdom, we must first return to the violent and bizarre circumstances of her conception, a Genesis story that is not merely a miraculous birth, but a calculated act of dynastic survival. The seeds of Athena's existence were sown in paranoia. Her father, Zeus, the king of the gods, sat upon a throne that he had seized through patricide and betrayal, forever haunted by a prophecy delivered by the primal forces of the universe, that his first wife, the Titaness Medusa, would bear him 2 children. The first would be a daughter of equal strength, but the second would be a son who would inevitably overthrow him, just as he had overthrown his father Cronus, and just as Cronus had overthrown Uranus. To a tyrant obsessed with the preservation of his absolute authority, this prophecy was a death sentence waiting to be written. Driven by this existential dread, Zeus committed an atrocity that would define the very essence of his daughter. In a grotesque perversion of intimacy, he tricked Medusa, the embodiment of prudence and deep thought, and swallowed her whole. He consumed the feminine source of wisdom to prevent the birth of a usurper, effectively turning his own body into a tomb for his wife and a womb for his child. It is here, within the dark, suffocating confines of the god-king's stomach, that Athena's gestation began. She was not nurtured in the warmth of a mother's embrace, but forged in the acid of a father's tyranny, absorbing the essence of a mother who had been silenced and erased. This is the first and most critical trauma of Athena's existence. She is the product of the ultimate patriarchal consumption. To truly understand the psychological architecture of the goddess of wisdom, we must first return to the violent and bizarre circumstances of her conception, a Genesis story that is not merely a miraculous birth, but a calculated act of dynastic survival. The seeds of Athena's existence were sown in paranoia. Her father, Zeus, the king of the gods, sat upon a throne that he had seized through patricide and betrayal, forever haunted by a prophecy delivered by the primal forces of the universe, that his first wife, the Titaness Medusa, would bear him 2 children. The first would be a daughter of equal strength, but the second would be a son who would inevitably overthrow him, just as he had overthrown his father Cronus, and just as Cronus had overthrown Uranus. To a tyrant obsessed with the preservation of his absolute authority, this prophecy was a death sentence waiting to be written. Driven by this existential dread, Zeus committed an atrocity that would define the very essence of his daughter. In a grotesque perversion of intimacy, he tricked Medusa, the embodiment of prudence and deep thought, and swallowed her whole. He consumed the feminine source of wisdom to prevent the birth of a usurper, effectively turning his own body into a tomb for his wife and a womb for his child. It is here, within the dark, suffocating confines of the god-king's stomach, that Athena's gestation began. She was not nurtured in the warmth of a mother's embrace, but forged in the acid of a father's tyranny, absorbing the essence of a mother who had been silenced and erased. This is the first and most critical trauma of Athena's existence. She is the product of the ultimate patriarchal consumption of the female spirit. When the time for her birth finally arrived, it did not come with the natural rhythms of labor, but with a violence that shook the foundations of Olympus. Racked by a splitting headache that threatened to tear his divine consciousness apart, Zeus commanded the smith god Hephaestus to strike his skull with a bronze axe. The blow was struck, the bone shattered, and from the open wound of her father's head sprang Athena, not as a helpless infant wailing for comfort, but as a fully grown adult, clad in gleaming armor, brandishing a sharp spear, and unleashing a terrifying war cry that caused the earth to tremble and the seas to churn. She did not emerge to learn, to grow, or to be nurtured. She emerged ready to fight, ready to command, and, most importantly, ready to serve the man who had birthed her. This cerebral birth is arguably the most significant symbolic event in Greek mythology regarding gender dynamics. By bypassing the female womb entirely, Athena was symbolically cleansed of what the ancient Greeks perceived as the weakness and pollution of biological womanhood. She was born of the head, the seat of logic, reason, and authority, rather than the body, which was associated with emotion, chaos, and nature. In the eyes of the ancient world, she was the perfect woman precisely because she was hardly a woman at all. She was a male mind trapped in a female form, a construct designed to uphold the laws of the father without the complicating sympathies of the mother. She is, in every sense, daddy's girl, but amplified to a cosmic scale where loyalty translates into the enforcement of divine will. This unique origin story created a psychological bond between Zeus and Athena that was unparalleled in the pantheon. While Zeus viewed his other children with suspicion, indifference, or lust, he looked upon Athena with a narcissistic pride,
for when he looked at her, he saw a reflection of his own intellect and power. She was the only deity entrusted with his most devastating weapon, the Aegis and the thunderbolt itself. Yet this power came with a heavy, unspoken price: total assimilation. To maintain her status as the favorite, the right hand of the king, Athena had to relentlessly suppress any connection to the feminine archetype represented by the mother she never knew. She became the virgin goddess, or Athena Parthenos, a title that signified not just sexual abstinence, but a political autonomy from the messy, emotional entanglements of marriage and maternity that defined the lives of other goddesses like Hera or Demeter. However, this autonomy was an illusion, a gilded cage forged from her own loyalty. By rejecting the traditional roles of women, she did not liberate herself. Rather, she positioned herself as the guardian of the very system that subjugated them. She became the Iron Maiden of Olympus, a figure who could walk among the male gods as an equal, only because she had thoroughly internalized their disdain for her own sex. This is the tragic paradox of Athena. She is the feminine ideal of a patriarchal society, a woman who fights for men, thinks like a man, and, when necessary, punishes other women who fail to fall in line. As we transition from her birth to her deeds, we must view her actions through this lens. She is not a free agent of justice. She is an extension of Zeus's will. Her wisdom is the wisdom of the state, of the established order, of the king. And when that order is threatened, even by the suffering of a helpless woman, Athena's choice is predetermined by her biology-defying birth. She will always choose the father. She will always choose power. And as we are about to see in the horrific tale of Medusa, when the choice is between protecting a violated sister or upholding the sanctity of a male god's dominion, Athena's judgment is swift, brutal, and devoid of mercy. When we speak of monsters in Greek mythology, one name inevitably rises to the surface, hissing through the corridors of history: Medusa. The image is iconic, burned into our cultural retina, a creature of nightmare with writhing serpents for hair, boar-like tusks, and a gaze so terrifyingly potent that it turns living flesh into cold, dead stone. For centuries, she has been the archetypal antagonist, the final boss in the hero's journey, a beast that exists solely to be vanquished by the righteous blade of Perseus. But history, as we know, is written by the victors, and in the case of Greek mythology, the victors were gods and men. To understand the true nature of Medusa, we must peel away the scales of the monster to reveal the weeping woman underneath. We must return to a time before the snakes, before the stone, to a time when Medusa was not a horror to be shunned, but a beauty to be worshipped. In the version of the myth recounted by the Roman poet Ovid, a writer who, unlike his Greek predecessors, often harbored a subtle sympathy for the victims of divine tyranny, Medusa was a mortal woman of breathtaking radiance. She was not just any woman, she was a devout priestess serving in the temple of Athena. This detail is crucial and often overlooked. By pledging herself to the virgin goddess, Medusa had committed to a life of purity, chastity, and servitude. She was in essence an extension of Athena's own earthly image, a mirror reflecting the goddess's demand for perfection. Her crowning glory was her hair, a cascading mane of golden locks that was the envy of mortals and the admiration of gods. Yet in the cruel economy of the ancient world, the beauty of a woman was rarely a gift. More often, it was a curse, a beacon that attracted the predatory gaze of the powerful. Enter Poseidon, the lord of the seas, the earth-shaker, and the uncle of Athena. Unlike the cerebral and calculated Athena, Poseidon was a deity of raw, chaotic impulse. He was the storm, the flood, the crashing wave that takes what it wants without negotiation or remorse. He saw Medusa not as a person or a priestess, but as a prize. What followed is one of the darkest moments in mythological canon. He did not court her, he hunted her. Fleeing from his advances, Medusa sought the only refuge she knew, the sacred temple of her goddess. She ran to the foot of Athena's statue, clinging to the altar, praying for sanctuary, believing that the house of the virgin goddess would be an inviolable fortress against male aggression.
She was wrong. Poseidon, undeterred by the sanctity of the location, or perhaps aroused by the very act of defiling his niece's territory, violated Medusa right there on the cold marble floor of the temple. It was a brutal act of sacrilege and rape. In a single moment, Medusa was stripped of her vows, her dignity, and her bodily autonomy. But as the assault ended and the sea god withdrew back to his watery domain, leaving a broken woman amidst the ruins of her faith, the true horror began. The victim looked up, expecting solace, expecting divine retribution against her attacker, or at the very least, a flicker of pity. Instead, she faced the wrath of Athena. The goddess of wisdom descended, but she did not come to comfort. In the twisted logic of ancient religious purity, the intent or consent of the victim was irrelevant. Only the physical act mattered. To Athena, Medusa had not been wronged, Medusa had been polluted. The temple, the physical representation of Athena's power and virginity, had been desecrated by the act of sex, and since Athena could not or would not punish her powerful uncle Poseidon, the blame had to fall downward. This is where the machinery of victim blaming kicks into high gear. Athena, consumed by a cold, bureaucratic rage, viewed Medusa's violation not as a tragedy, but an insult to her. The logic is terrifyingly simple. You allowed this to happen in my house. You are the stain. Some modern reinterpretations attempt to soften this blow, suggesting that Athena transformed Medusa to protect her, to give her a weapon so no man could ever touch her again. But let us look at the text, let us look at the reality of the punishment. Athena did not grant Medusa a shield, she stripped her of her humanity. She took the very thing Medusa was most proud of, her beautiful hair, and twisted it into a nest of venomous vipers. She made Medusa's face so hideous that it broke the fundamental connection of human empathy, eye contact. To look at Medusa was to die. This was not protection. This was isolation. It was a sentence of eternal loneliness, banishing a traumatized woman to a desolate island, turning her into a monster so that her internal pain would be matched by her external monstrosity. There is a comforting lie that has circulated in modern feminist reinterpretations of mythology, a desperate attempt to redeem the goddess of wisdom. The theory suggests that the curse was a blessing in disguise, that by making Medusa terrifying, Athena was granting her the ultimate power of self-defense, ensuring that no man could ever hurt her again. It is a beautiful thought. It paints Athena as a secret ally, a sister in arms, operating within a broken system. But if we follow the myth to its bloody conclusion, this theory crumbles into dust. If Athena truly cared for Medusa, if the snakes were meant to be a shield, then why did the goddess of wisdom personally architect Medusa's assassination?
Years after the transformation, when the young hero Perseus sought to slay the Gorgon to save his own mother, it was Athena who appeared to him. She did not stand in his way to protect the sanctuary she had allegedly created from Medusa. On the contrary, she became the mission's handler. She provided Perseus with the critical intelligence needed to locate the exile's lair. She, along with Hermes, equipped him with the divine tools necessary for the job. Most damning of all, she gave him the polished bronze shield, the mirror that would allow him to look at Medusa's reflection without turning to stone. Athena essentially handed the assassin the scope for his sniper rifle. She neutralized the very defense mechanism she had supposedly gifted to the victim. The execution itself was not a heroic duel, it was a butchery. Perseus, guided by Athena's hand, crept into the Gorgon's cave while she was sleeping. Let that image sink in. The monster was not rampaging, she was not attacking villages, she was asleep in the dark, isolated and alone. Furthermore, according to the myth, Medusa was pregnant at the time, carrying the children of Poseidon, the result of that initial trauma. When Perseus severed her head, the winged horse Pegasus and the giant Chrysaor sprang from her bleeding neck. Athena, the goddess of justice, oversaw the decapitation of a sleeping, pregnant victim who had been exiled for the crime of being raped. There is no justice here. There is only the cold, clinical elimination of a loose end. But the final insult was yet to come. After the deed was done, after Medusa's body was left to rot on the stone floor of her cavern, what happened to her head? Perseus used it as a weapon for a time, yes, but eventually he surrendered it to his patron. Athena took the severed head of the woman she had cursed, the woman she had helped kill, and she mounted it upon her own shield, the aegis. This is the ultimate act of appropriation. Athena wears the face of her victim as a trophy. By affixing the gorgonion to her breastplate, she harnessed the terrifying power of the feminine monstrosity she had created, but she sanitized it, controlled it, and subordinated it to the service of her father, Zeus. It is a chilling message to the world. The wild, uncontrolled, or traumatized female, Medusa, must be slain, and her power can only be useful when it is severed, tamed, and worn by the good daughter, Athena, who upholds the patriarchal order. Medusa's tragedy is the foundational sin of Athena's mythology. It proves that her loyalty to the male hierarchy overrides any solidarity with her own gender. To Athena, Medusa was never a sister to be protected. She was a problem to be solved, a scapegoat to be punished, and finally, a resource to be harvested. And as we move from the physical violence of the Gorgon's cave to the psychological warfare of the weaving contest, we will see that Athena's intolerance for female defiance is not limited to monsters. It extends to any woman who dares to claim she is better than the gods.
If the tragedy of Medusa revealed Athena's cruelty towards the victimized, the tale of Arachne exposes an even more unsettling flaw in the divine psyche, a fragile, trembling insecurity that cannot abide the existence of a rival. We are often told that the Greek gods are jealous beings, guarding their domains with paranoid ferocity, but Athena, the embodiment of logic and reason, is supposed to be above such petty emotions. She is the patron of the arts and crafts, the mentor of humanity, the one who guides our hands to create beauty. Yet when faced with a mortal woman whose talent rivaled and perhaps exceeded her own, the mask of the benevolent teacher slipped, revealing the tyrant beneath. The story begins in the humble region of Lydia, where a young woman named Arachne gained fame not for her lineage or her wealth, but for her supernatural ability to weave. She was the daughter of a simple dyer, a nobody in the grand social hierarchy of Greece, yet her tapestries were so exquisite that nymphs would abandon their streams and forests just to watch her work. Her fingers moved with a fluidity that seemed to defy the stiffness of the loom, creating images so lifelike that birds would try to perch on her woven branches. However, Arachne possessed a fatal flaw, one that the Greeks called hubris, excessive pride. She refused to acknowledge that her gift came from Athena. "I taught myself," she declared, a radical assertion of human agency that threatened the divine monopoly on talent. To the gods, this was blasphemy. To the modern eye, it was simply a working-class artist demanding credit for her own labor. Athena, hearing of this insolence, did not immediately strike. True to her nature as the goddess of strategy, she first conducted a reconnaissance mission. She descended to Earth disguised as an old woman, a crone with gray hair and a hobbling gait, offering Arachne a chance to recant. She warned the girl to seek forgiveness, to bow her head and acknowledge the supremacy of the Olympians. It was a test of submission.
But Arachne, fueled by the arrogance of youth and the undeniable truth of her own skill, laughed in the old woman's face. She challenged the goddess directly. "Let her come. Let us weave. If I lose, I will accept any punishment." The disguise fell away. The crone vanished, replaced by the towering, radiant form of Athena in all her glory. The nymphs bowed. The bystanders trembled. But Arachne did not flinch. She sat at her loom, pale but resolute, ready to war with a god using nothing but wool and a shuttle. What followed was the most significant artistic duel in mythology, a silent battle fought with threads instead of swords, and it is in the content of their respective tapestries that the true ideological conflict is revealed.
Athena wove a tapestry of absolute order and terrifying majesty. Her canvas depicted the 12 Olympians seated on their high thrones, radiating power and authority. In the corners of her work, she wove cautionary tales, vignettes of mortals who had dared to challenge the gods and were punished for their presumption. It was a piece of divine propaganda, a visual manifesto of the status quo. We are the rulers, you are the subjects, obey or suffer. It was technically flawless, a masterpiece of intimidation. Arachne, however, wove something entirely different. She did not weave glory, she wove truth. Her tapestry was a scathing exposé of divine corruption, an intricate catalog of the crimes committed by the gods against women. She depicted Zeus in his endless string of deceits, how he transformed into a bull to abduct Europa, a swan to violate Leda, a shower of gold to impregnate Diane. She wove Poseidon's brutality and Apollo's cruelty. It was a work of investigative journalism rendered in silk, a fearless Me Too movement thousands of years before the term existed. She stripped away the glamour of Olympus to reveal the predators lurking behind the lightning and the waves. When the weaving stopped, the moment of judgment arrived. Athena stepped forward to inspect her rival's work. She looked for a loose thread, a missed stitch, a color out of place, any technical error that would justify a victory. She found none. The Roman poet Ovid explicitly states that not even envy herself could find a flaw in Arachne's work. The mortal had achieved perfection. She had held a mirror up to the gods, and the reflection was hideous, but the artistry was divine. Athena's reaction was not one of respect for a worthy adversary. It was an explosion of uncontrollable narcissistic rage. Confronted with a truth she could not refute and a skill she could not surpass, the goddess of wisdom abandoned reason and resorted to brute force. She took her shuttle made of boxwood and struck Arachne across the face, once, twice, 3 times. She then ripped the magnificent tapestry to shreds, destroying the evidence of the gods' crimes. This was an act of supreme censorship, the authority figure silencing the artist who dared to speak the truth. Broken, humiliated, and terrified by the physical assault, Arachne's spirit shattered. She grabbed a rope and attempted to hang herself, seeking escape and death. But Athena was not done with her. In a final act of twisted mercy, she denied Arachne the release of death. "Live, you wicked girl," Athena cursed, sprinkling her with the juices of Hecate's herbs, "but hang forever and weave forever." Arachne's body contorted, her hair fell out, her nose and ears vanished, her head shrank, and her slender fingers transformed into long, spindly legs. She became the first spider. Athena left her there, dangling from her own thread, condemned to weave for eternity, but stripped of the ability to create art that could challenge the world. The message was clear. You may keep your skill, but you will be small, you will be repulsive, and your creations will be swept away by the broom of history. Athena secured her title as the patron of weavers not by being the best, but by turning the competition into an insect.
If the tragedies of Medusa and Arachne were intimate crimes, surgical strikes against individuals who bruised the divine ego, then the Trojan War represents the scaling up of Athena's malice to the level of geopolitical catastrophe. It is here, on the blood-soaked plains of Ilium, that we see the true cost of a goddess's vanity. We are often taught that the Trojan War was fought for the love of Helen, the face that launched 1,000 ships. But behind the movements of armies and the clash of bronze, the war was, in reality, a proxy battle fueled by the petty grievances of 3 immortal women squabbling over a piece of fruit. And among them, the reaction of Athena, the goddess of wisdom, is perhaps the most shocking of all. The incident is known as the Judgment of Paris. It began not with a declaration of war, but with a wedding crasher. Eris, the goddess of discord, threw a golden apple inscribed with the words, "To the fairest," into a gathering of the gods. Immediately, the 3 most powerful goddesses, Hera, the queen of heaven, Aphrodite, the goddess of love, and Athena, the goddess of wisdom, claimed the prize. Let us pause and appreciate the absurdity of this moment. Athena, the cerebral strategist, the virgin warrior who supposedly eschews the frivolous nature of romance and physical allure, threw her hat into the ring for a beauty pageant. Why does the goddess of intelligence care about being the fairest? This singular act shatters the illusion of her aloof superiority. It reveals that beneath the armor and the intellect lies a deep-seated insecurity, a desperate need for validation that is indistinguishable from the vanity she often mocks in others. She did not step back and say, "I am the mind of God. This contest is beneath me." No, she stepped forward and said, "I am the prettiest and I will prove it." The judge of this divine contest was Paris, a mortal shepherd prince of Troy. To sway his vote, the goddesses did not rely on their natural beauty alone. They resorted to bribery. Hera offered him a kingdom. Aphrodite offered him the most beautiful woman in the world. And Athena? She stripped off her aegis, laid down her spear, and offered Paris the ultimate male fantasy. "I will make you the greatest warrior in history. I will grant you wisdom in battle and victory in every war you wage." She was selling the blood of nations to buy a compliment. When Paris, a young man ruled by his hormones, inevitably chose Aphrodite and her promise of Helen, Athena's reaction was not one of stoic acceptance. A truly wise being would have understood the folly of the situation, shrugged off the judgment of a shepherd, and returned to the high affairs of Olympus. But Athena did not possess true wisdom. She possessed knowledge, which is a dangerous distinction. Wounded by the rejection, consumed by the realization that a mortal man did not find her to be the pinnacle of desire, she declared a vendetta. But she did not just target Paris. That would have been too simple. She targeted his father, his brothers, his city, and his people. She decided that Troy must burn. This is the terrifying scale of her retribution. Because one Trojan man failed to validate her physical beauty, Athena committed herself to the complete annihilation of the entire Trojan race. She allied herself with Hera, putting aside their usual differences to form a coalition of destruction. Throughout the 10-year siege, Athena was the most active, the most ruthless, and the most manipulative interventionist on the Greek side. She did not fight for justice. The Greeks were arguably the aggressors, invading a sovereign land to reclaim a runaway wife. She fought for spite. She fought to ensure that the city of the man who called her second best would be reduced to ash and rubble. This sets the stage for her conduct during the war itself. She was not a neutral arbiter of conflict, she was a saboteur. As we look closer at the battlefield in the next section, we will see that Athena's hands are dirtier than any other god's. She does not just inspire strategy, she personally orchestrates deceit, guiding spears into flesh and tricking heroes into their graves, all to satisfy a grudge born from a golden apple. Once the war began, Athena did not merely observe from the clouds, she descended into the mud and blood, acting as the ultimate agent of chaos. While Ares, the god of war, is often reviled for his bloodlust, he is at least honest in his savagery. Ares represents the raw, chaotic frenzy of battle. He kills because it is his nature. Athena, however, is far more dangerous because she intellectualizes the slaughter. She treats the battlefield like a chessboard, and human lives are merely pawns to be sacrificed for a checkmate. Throughout the Iliad, her interventions are rarely about preserving peace or justice. They are calculated moves to prolong the conflict and maximize the suffering of the Trojans. The most damning indictment of her character occurs during the climax of the war, the duel between Achilles and Hector. Hector was the noblest of all the heroes in the Trojan cycle. He was a devoted husband, a loving father, and a reluctant warrior fighting solely to protect his home from invaders. Achilles, conversely, was a rage-filled demigod, a killing machine driven by a personal vendetta. In a fair universe, or under the watch of a just deity, Hector might have stood a chance, or at least been granted an honorable death. But Athena ensured that fairness would have no place on that day.
As Hector fled from the rampage of Achilles, running circles around the walls of his doomed city, he found himself alone, exhausted and terrified. It was then that Athena appeared to him. But she did not appear in her true form. She shapeshifted into the likeness of Deiphobus, Hector's beloved brother. She ran to his side, looking him in the eye with a mask of brotherly love, and lied to him. "Brother," she said, "let us stand together and fight this man." Imagine the surge of hope that must have flooded Hector's heart. He was not alone. His family was with him. Emboldened by this false promise of support, Hector stopped running. He turned to face the invincible Achilles, believing he had a fighting chance because his brother was at his shoulder. He threw his spear. He fought with courage. But when he turned to ask Deiphobus for another weapon, the phantom was gone. Athena had vanished, dissolving into the air, leaving Hector to realize in his final, agonizing moments that he had been tricked by the gods. He died not just in pain, but in absolute despair, knowing that the divine powers had mocked his bravery. Athena did not just help kill him, she psychologically tortured him before the final blow. Is this the behavior of a goddess of wisdom, or is it the sadism of a trickster spirit? With Hector dead, the fall of Troy was inevitable, but Athena was not content with a military victory. She wanted total annihilation. It was Athena who inspired the construction of the wooden horse, the ultimate instrument of deceit. The Trojans, pious to a fault, believed the horse was an offering to Athena, a peace offering to appease the goddess who hated them. They dragged the instrument of their own destruction into their city in her name. When the Greeks emerged from the belly of the horse that night, the massacre that followed was absolute. They butchered men in their sleep, enslaved women, and hurled infants from the walls. And here, the story comes full circle in a moment of bitter irony. During the sack of Troy, the Trojan princess Cassandra, who had been cursed so that no one would believe her prophecies, fled to the temple of Athena for protection, just as Medusa had done years before. And just like Medusa, Cassandra was violently dragged from the altar and raped by a Greek warrior, Ajax the Lesser. The statue of Athena reportedly looked away in horror. Now, Athena did punish Ajax the Lesser and the Greek fleet for this sacrilege, sending storms to wreck their ships on the journey home. But let us be clear about her motivation. She did not destroy the Greek fleet because she cared about Cassandra's trauma. She destroyed them because her temple was disrespected, her statue was touched. It was a matter of property rights, not human rights.
The Greeks were her useful idiots, her tools of vengeance against Troy, but the moment they bruised her ego, she discarded them as easily as she had discarded Arachne. Ultimately, Athena stands amidst the ashes of Troy, a city she helped burn to the ground because of a beauty contest. She destroyed a civilization, orchestrated the death of its noblest defender, and facilitated the enslavement of its women. The wisdom of Athena, when applied to war, looks suspiciously like the cold calculation of a sociopath. She won, but looking at the smoking ruins and the broken bodies, one must ask, was the prize worth the price?
We have witnessed Athena as the silent accomplice in rape, the jealous executioner of rivals, and the deceitful architect of genocide. Yet, her most profound impact on Western civilization was not forged on the battlefield, but in a courtroom. It is in the tragedy of the Eumenides, the final play of Aeschylus's Orestes trilogy, that Athena codified the patriarchy into law. Here, she steps down from the clouds to preside over the first murder trial in history, and her verdict sends a shockwave that resonates through the millennia. In the eyes of the state, the life of a mother is worth less than the authority of a father. The defendant is Orestes, the son of Agamemnon, the commander of the Greeks at Troy. The case is gruesome. Orestes has murdered his own mother, Clytemnestra. He claims he did it to avenge his father, whom Clytemnestra had killed. This creates a terrifying legal and moral paradox. On one side stand the Furies, the Erinyes, ancient chthonic goddesses who represent the old laws of the earth. To them, the bond between mother and child is the most sacred thing in existence. Matricide is an unforgivable sin, a pollution that must be cleansed with blood. They demand Orestes' soul. On the other side stands Apollo, the shining god of the new patriarchal order, who ordered Orestes to commit the murder. Apollo argues that the father is the true parent, the sower of the seed, while the mother is merely a vessel, a stranger who incubates the life given to her. It is a clash of civilizations, the old matriarchal blood rights versus the new patriarchal political state, and holding the scales of justice is Athena. The trial takes place on the Areopolis, the Rock of Ares, in Athens. A jury of 12 Athenian citizens is selected. They listen to the arguments, and when the time comes to vote, they are deadlocked. 6 votes for conviction, 6 votes for acquittal. In the event of a tie, the deciding vote falls to Athena. This is the moment. The goddess of wisdom has the power to define the moral landscape of humanity. She has the power to uphold the sanctity of life or to validate a political killing. She has the power to say that a son cannot kill the woman who gave him birth. But Athena does not choose the mother. She casts her stone for Orestes, acquitting him of matricide. Her justification for this verdict is one of the most chilling monologues in classical literature. She does not argue based on evidence, nor on the specific circumstances of the crime. She argues based on her own political identity politics. She declares, "There is no mother anywhere who gave me birth, and, but for marriage, I am always for the male with all my heart and strongly on my father's side." So, in a case where the wife has killed her husband, lord of the house, her death shall not be of higher importance to me. Let us deconstruct this statement. Athena explicitly states that because she was born from Zeus alone, she has no biological or emotional connection to the female experience. She is always for the male. She validates Apollo's grotesque argument that mothers are disposable. By saving Orestes, she establishes a legal precedent, the bond to the father, and by extension, the husband and the state, supersedes the bond to the mother. She declares that the killing of a husband, Agamemnon, is a crime against authority that demands death, but the killing of a mother, Clytemnestra, is a justifiable act of service to that authority. This is the ultimate betrayal.
Athena, a female deity, uses her supreme authority to disenfranchise her own sex. She tells the women of Athens and the women of the world that their role in creation is secondary, that their lives are less valuable than the men who rule them. She essentially acts as the cool girl of Olympus, the one who hangs out with the guys, laughs at their jokes, and agrees that women are too emotional and irrational to be trusted. Furthermore, consider how she deals with the Furies after the verdict. The Furies are enraged. They threaten to poison the soil of Athens, to blight the crops and make the women barren. They represent the primal female rage at this injustice. Athena, ever the diplomat, does not fight them. She buys them off. She offers them a new home underground, a new title, the Eumenides, or the Kindly Ones, and promises that the Athenians will worship them as long as they stay buried, as long as they stop screaming, as long as they accept the new order. She domesticates the wild, ancient female power, burying it beneath the foundations of her new male-dominated city. The trial of Orestes is the final piece of the puzzle. It proves that Athena's wisdom is not universal truth. It is political pragmatism designed to uphold a specific hierarchy. She is the guardian of the polis, the city, and the city is a man's world. To maintain her position at the pinnacle of this world, she must sever the final thread connecting her to womanhood. She must not only kill the mother in a literal sense by condoning matricide, she must kill the concept of the mother as an authority figure. In the end, Athena stands victorious. The Furies are silenced, the mother is dead and unavenged, and the son who wielded the blade walks free. The patriarchy is safe, protected by the shield of the virgin goddess. She has proven, once and for all, that she is her father's daughter.
We have traversed the landscape of mythology, stepping over the stones of victims and wading through the rivers of blood spilled by the goddess of wisdom. Now, we must assemble these fragmented pieces into a coherent psychological profile. When we look at the totality of Athena's actions, the punishment of Medusa, the destruction of Arachne, the annihilation of Troy, and the betrayal of Clytemnestra, a disturbing pattern emerges. It is not merely a pattern of cruelty, it is a pattern of specific, targeted hostility toward her own gender. In modern psychological terms, Athena is the ultimate embodiment of internalized misogyny. Internalized misogyny occurs when women subconsciously project the sexist attitudes of their society onto themselves and other women. It manifests as a rejection of traditional femininity, a distancing from other women to gain male approval, and the policing of female behavior. Athena checks every single box of this diagnosis, magnified to a divine scale. First, consider her identity as the virgin. Unlike Hestia or Artemis, who use their virginity to seek solitude or communion with nature away from the gaze of men, Athena's virginity is political. It is a declaration of neutrality in the sexual wars, but more importantly, it is a way to desexualize herself in the eyes of her father and the other male gods. By stripping away her sexuality, she removes the primary vulnerability that defined women in the ancient world. She becomes one of the boys, a sexless advisor who can be trusted in the war room because she is not distracted by female emotions. But this survival strategy requires a scapegoat. Because she suppresses her own femininity to survive in a patriarchy, she reacts with visceral, explosive rage whenever she encounters a woman who embraces that femininity or sexuality. Medusa was sexual. She was punished. Arachne was a creative professional who took pride in her work. She was silenced. Helen was the embodiment of desire. Her city was burned. Athena attacks these women because they represent the shadow self she has had to kill within herself to remain Zeus's favorite. In psychology, we often hate in others what we cannot accept in ourselves. Athena hates the vulnerability of the victim because she cannot afford to be vulnerable.
She hates the pride of the artist because her own pride is entirely dependent on her father. Furthermore, Athena suffers from what we might call queen bee syndrome. She acts as a gatekeeper. Instead of using her immense power to lift other women up, to change the rules of the game so that mortals like Medusa or Arachne could survive, she enforces the rules more strictly than the men do. She pulls the ladder up behind her. She essentially says, I made it to the top by playing by men's rules, so you must too, and if you fail, you deserve your fate. This is why she is so dangerous. A male misogynist like Ares or Poseidon is predictable, their aggression is overt, but a female enforcer like Athena is insidious because she wears the face of a sister while wielding the knife of a traitor. She validates the system. When a woman says the system is fair, it carries more weight than when a man says it. Athena is the patriarchy's most valuable PR agent. We must also look at her relationship with Zeus through the lens of trauma bonding, or identification with the aggressor. Zeus is a tyrant who ate her mother. He is a serial rapist and a chaotic ruler. Yet Athena worships him. She has no identity separate from him. She wears his aegis, she wields his thunderbolt, she speaks with his voice. This is the psychology of the perfect soldier or the brainwashed cult member. She has completely assimilated the worldview of the powerful male figure to ensure her own safety. Her wisdom is not independent critical thinking, it is the intelligence of the regime. It is the ability to rationalize the king's cruelty as necessary justice. Finally, there is the profound loneliness at the core of her character. Athena has no mother, no lover, and no true friends. She is surrounded by men who respect her utility but cannot understand her nature, and she is feared by women who see her as a punisher. She sits on the peak of Olympus, clad in cold armor, armed with a spear that has tasted the blood of her sisters, eternally vigilant, eternally alone. She bought her power with her soul. She traded solidarity for sovereignty. So when we see the statue of Athena, we should not see a champion of women. We should see a cautionary tale. She is a reminder of what happens when a marginalized group tries to gain power not by dismantling the oppressive system, but by becoming its most efficient executioner. She is the gray goddess, not just because of her eyes, but because she exists in the moral gray zone where survival justifies betrayal. As we stand at the end of this journey, looking back at the trail of stone statues, broken looms, and burning cities, the pristine image of Athena that we hold in our minds begins to crack. We came looking for a hero, a feminist icon standing tall in the Bronze Age, a protector of the innocent. But what we found was something far more complex, far more terrifying, and perhaps far more human. We found a deity who was a master of survival, a political creature who navigated the treacherous waters of a cosmic patriarchy by becoming its sharpest weapon. Athena is often called Glaucopis, the gray-eyed goddess. For centuries, poets have debated the exact meaning of this epithet. Does it refer to the flashing color of the sea, the gleam of an owl's stare? But perhaps, after dissecting her myths, we can find a new meaning. She is the goddess of the gray. She exists in the moral twilight between right and wrong, between justice and tyranny, between the victim and the oppressor. She is not the black and white hero we want her to be. She is the gray reality of power. To understand Athena is to understand the cold, hard truth of the ancient world. Power does not apologize. Power does not weep. And most importantly, power protects itself. Athena represents the intellect that detaches itself from emotion to achieve a goal. It is the kind of wisdom that wins wars but loses its soul. It is the kind of justice that upholds the law but crushes the spirit. She is the patron saint of the status quo, the guardian of the establishment, who ensures that the machinery of the world keeps turning, even if that machinery is lubricated with the blood of the unfortunate.
We cannot deny her greatness. She is magnificent in her capability, awe-inspiring in her strategy, and essential to the survival of the hero. Without her, Perseus fails, Odysseus wanders forever, and Orestes dies. She brings civilization, she brings order, she brings the olive tree. But we must also acknowledge the price of that order. We must acknowledge the women like Medusa and Arachne, who were ground into dust so that Athena's city could shine on the hill. We must acknowledge that in her quest to be the perfect daughter of the father, she became the nightmare of the mother. Perhaps it is unfair to judge an ancient goddess by modern moral standards. Perhaps she was simply playing the hand she was dealt in a universe ruled by a paranoid tyrant like Zeus. In a world where women were property, Athena chose to be a prince. She chose agency over solidarity. She chose to be the exception rather than the rule. Can we blame her? Maybe not, but we certainly don't have to worship the choices she made. So, the next time you see a statue of Athena, with her helmet pulled low and her shield raised high, look closely at the face on her breastplate. Look at the snake-haired Gorgon frozen in an eternal scream. That is the true story of Athena. It is the story of a woman who wears the severed head of her sister as a warning to anyone who dares to step out of line. She is the goddess of wisdom, yes, but it is a cold, lonely wisdom, a wisdom that knows everything about how to rule the world, but has forgotten how to care for the people living in it. Thank you for joining me on this descent into the mythology of the Gray Goddess. If this deep dive has changed the way you see Athena, or if you think I've been too harsh on the Olympian favorite, let me know in the comments below. Mythology is a living conversation, and I want to hear your voice. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell for more documentaries that explore the shadows of history. Until next time, stay curious and always question the narratives of the powerful.